Jesus Christ was telling people the message of God and that he was the Messiah and Son of God. He had his followers and his fame increased because people could see who he was. However, the Jewish authorities felt threatened, and that's when the Jewish high priest Caiaphas decided to intervene. Instead of directly attacking Jesus and killing him, he decided to play tactically. He ensured he could prove charges of blasphemy which were punishable by death. After establishing that Jesus was committing blasphemy, he could convince the Roman authorities to kill Jesus, and that's what precisely happened. But Caiaphas did not stop there. He facilitated the persecution and execution of Jesus' followers after Jesus' crucifixion. This made the weight of sins on his shoulder unbearable, leading to a horrific death. But how did this high priest die, and how God made him an example? Welcome to a new episode of Uncovering Untold Stories, a channel where we talk about the secret and hidden historical stories, events, and incidents of the past that find their roots in either religious or history books. It's a place where you will hear the most unorthodox and hard-to-believe stories that have been forgotten but are part of history, shaping our lives to this day. In this episode, we will tell the story of High Priest Caiaphas and his unexplainable death. Let's get started. Joseph ben Caiaphas, widely known as Caiaphas, served as the high priest of ancient Judea during a critical period in history, notably during Jesus' ministry. Born around 14 BC and passing away around 46 AD, Caiaphas made a lasting impact as detailed in the New Testament and by the historian Josephus. His ascent to power occurred during Roman rule, a time characterized by political maneuvering. According to Josephus, Caiaphas became a high priest in AD 18, appointed by the Roman prefect Valerius Gratus. This appointment came after Simon ben Settlus was deposed. Caiaphas's tenure as high priest was notably long, outlasting any of his contemporaries during New Testament times. His ability to hold this position for nearly 2 decades indicates his adeptness in handling and manipulating challenges at will. Although Jesus' teachings and actions disturbed the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court and authority, led by Caiaphas, had not encountered him in his adult life, making his identification difficult. Their search for someone who knew Jesus well led them to Judas Iscariot. Despite being close to Jesus, Judas struggled with personal weaknesses, particularly a greed for money. Judas fell to temptation and betrayed Jesus for money. His notorious act of betrayal came with a deceptive kiss, signaling to the religious leaders that Jesus was among his disciples. Seizing the opportunity, they arrested Jesus and brought him to Caiaphas's residence, setting the stage for events that would change history forever. Usually, when the temple guards arrested someone, they were held in the temple stockade until the full Sanhedrin or priestly council could hear their case. This was the procedure followed for Peter, John, and other apostles when they were arrested. However, when Jesus was arrested, he was taken directly to the Jerusalem residence of the high priest, Joseph Caiaphas, bypassing this standard protocol. This deviation was highly unusual for several reasons. First, it was the eve of Passover, one of the holiest nights on the Jewish calendar. The high priest and other officials would typically be celebrating the festival with their families, not adjudicating the case of a rural rabbi from Galilee. Second, while Caiaphas's residence was likely comfortable, if not luxurious, it was probably not large enough to accommodate the full quorum of 72 members of the Sanhedrin, even if they could be summoned on such short notice. The indictment of Jesus, as described in Mark's account, which influenced all subsequent Gospels, was conducted under the cover of darkness. This suggests that Caiaphas was eager to handle Jesus swiftly and discreetly, without the full Sanhedrin's involvement. According to John, Jesus was first questioned by Annas, Caiaphas's father-in-law and former high priest, who was considered a leading authority on religious matters. After a brief hearing, Jesus was then sent to Caiaphas. At this time, Caiaphas had been in office for about 12 years, having succeeded his brother-in-law Eleazar ben Ananus, one of Annas's 5 sons who became high priests. Caiaphas faced a difficult situation. Without the full Sanhedrin's support, he could not single-handedly order Jesus' death. His only option was to refer the case to the local Roman government. This was a controversial move because the Sanhedrin had fought hard to maintain its autonomy in domestic matters without Roman interference. Furthermore, Jesus was only guilty of disturbing the peace and possibly blasphemy in the temple forecourt, neither of which warranted Roman intervention or a death sentence. In frustration, The high priest tore his clothes and exclaimed, "Why do we still need witnesses?" In his view, Jesus had incriminated himself. The indictment hearing described by Mark did not go as planned. The testimonies from the various eyewitnesses didn't match up. One witness claimed, "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands.'" Although this was inflammatory rhetoric, it wasn't enough for prosecution since many prophets in Hebrew scripture had made similar statements about the temple's impending destruction. Caiaphas then took a different approach and asked Jesus directly, "Are you the Messiah?" According to Mark, Jesus replied, "I am," and referenced the book of Daniel and the Psalms. "You will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power and coming with the clouds of heaven." This was exactly what Caiaphas needed. He knew the Romans weren't interested in Jewish religious details, but phrases like the right hand of the power would catch their attention. But why did Caiaphas order an immediate hearing on Jesus' fate at his own residence? One reason might be that he wanted to prevent any further violent demonstrations like Jesus' attack on the money changers, which could provoke Roman forces. Another reason could be that Caiaphas anticipated the Pharisee faction of the Sanhedrin defending Jesus. The Gospels note that Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, both Sanhedrin members, were sympathetic to Jesus' teachings. Therefore, Caiaphas' fear was justified. Months later, when Peter and the apostles were brought before the Sanhedrin, the Pharisee Gamaliel defended them and secured their release. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos about little heard and untold real historical stories. Let's continue now. It's unlikely that Jesus' indictment involved the full council, as Mark suggests. According to the Mishnah, the Sanhedrin could not hold trials at night or during festivals. Even if Caiaphas had managed to gather the entire Sanhedrin, including the scribes, they would not have fit in his home. Formal meetings of the Sanhedrin usually took place in the Lishkat Lagazit, located in the temple's stoa. John's Gospel does not mention the chief priests or Sanhedrin members being present at all. As Jesus gained more attention and followers, it stirred deep-seated feelings of hatred and jealousy among the leaders. They envied Jesus' authority, which seemed to overshadow their own. This intense jealousy fueled their determination to eliminate him, as his claims directly challenged their status and influence among the people. Additionally, Jesus' actions further enraged the religious leaders. When he healed a demon-possessed man, some in the crowd speculated whether he might be the Messiah, asking, "Could this be the son of David, the Messiah?" However, when the Jewish authorities heard this, they dismissed Jesus' power, attributing it to Beelzebub, the ruler of demons. Instead of recognizing Jesus as the Messiah, they accused him of using demonic forces. This interpretation deepened their resolve to have Jesus killed. Jesus also directly confronted their religious practices. Twice he entered the temple and drove out the money changers, overturning their tables and condemning them for turning his Father's house into a marketplace. These actions exposed the hypocrisy within their religious rituals, further provoking the religious leaders. The political background of Jesus' time added another layer of complexity to the leaders' motivations. The region was tense with conflict between the Jewish community and Roman authorities. The concept of a Messiah often evoked hopes of a liberator who would lead a revolt against Roman rule, fostering desires for independence among the Jewish people. However, Jesus' teachings diverged from these expectations of a militant Messiah. Instead of advocating armed rebellion, he preached about a spiritual kingdom, challenging conventional notions of political uprising. This contrast between popular expectations and Jesus' peaceful message presented a dilemma for the religious leaders. They not only grappled with religious concerns, but also feared the political consequences of Jesus' influence. The prospect of Roman retaliation and the potential disruption of their way of life intensified their determination to eliminate Jesus. Although unintentionally, Jesus represented a threat to the delicate political balance of the time, leading the religious leaders to perceive him as a danger that must be eliminated. After the trial before the Jewish court, Jesus was to be taken to the Roman authorities, who would implement capital punishment. Accusing Jesus of various charges, particularly his claim to be the king of the Jews, which could be seen as a challenge to Roman authority, Caiaphas and the leaders pressed their case. They tried everything they could to prove Jesus was a threat to Roman authority. Jesus' words were twisted and misquoted. However, Pilate found no substantial grounds for charging Jesus. Attempting to evade responsibility, Pilate discovered Jesus was from Galilee and therefore under Herod Antipas's jurisdiction. After finding no fault in Jesus, Herod sent him back to Pilate. Caught between pressure from Jewish leaders and his own reluctance to condemn an innocent man, Pilate proposed a compromise. He offered the crowd a choice between releasing Jesus or Barabbas, a notorious criminal. Despite Pilate's efforts to spare Jesus, the crowd, swayed by the chief priests, chose to release Barabbas and demanded Jesus' crucifixion. Pilate, symbolically washing his hands to absolve himself of guilt, reluctantly handed Jesus over to be crucified. Thus, Jesus endured the painful journey to Golgotha, where he was crucified alongside two criminals. Darkness covered the land as Jesus spoke his final words, including the poignant cry, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." With these words, Jesus breathed his last, marking the culmination of his sacrificial journey for humanity. The Bible does not specify the exact number of days between Jesus' arrest and his death. However, based on gospel narratives, it is generally believed that Jesus was arrested on the night of Maundy Thursday and crucified on Good Friday, suggesting a span of about 1 day from Thursday night to Friday afternoon. With Caiaphas, the Jewish high priesthood came to an end. The service had become corrupt and lost its connection with God. The priests despised truth and righteousness, becoming tyrannical, deceptive, and driven by selfish ambitions. Such a tainted ministry could achieve nothing perfect as the grace of God was absent. Though Caiaphas wore priestly robes, he lacked a genuine connection with God. His heart was uncircumcised. Proud and overbearing, he demonstrated his unworthiness to wear the garments of the high priest. He had no divine authority or guidance from God to understand the true purpose of the priestly office. The priesthood had become so perverted that when Christ declared himself the Son of God, Caiaphas, in feigned horror, tore his robe and accused the Holy One of Israel of blasphemy. The mock trial of Christ revealed the corruption of the priesthood. The priests hired men to testify falsely, but truth prevailed. Pilate declared, "I find in him no fault at all." This showed that the witness against the Savior was false, bought by men with the deepest corruption in their hearts. God intended that those who delivered Jesus to death would hear the testimony of his innocence. Even Judas, throwing the betrayal money at the priest's feet, cried, "I have sinned in that I have betrayed innocent blood." Caiaphas's words, this he spoke not of himself, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus should die for the nation, carried a deeper meaning. He unknowingly declared that Christ was about to fulfill the purpose for which the sacrificial system had been instituted. Each actor in history plays their part, good or evil, in God's plan. Christ stood pure and undefiled before the corrupt high priest. He mourned for humanity's transgressions, even bearing Caiaphas's guilt. While Caiaphas pretended horror and tore his robe, Christ's soul was rent. His human flesh was torn on the cross as he became the sin-bearer. By his suffering and death, a new way was opened, breaking down the wall between Jew and Gentile. Regarding what happened to Caiaphas after Jesus' death and resurrection, New Testament accounts describe the religious leaders taking various actions to suppress the news of Jesus' resurrection or discredit his disciples. In the Gospel of Matthew, it is mentioned that the chief priests and elders bribed the soldiers guarding the tomb to spread a false story. They instructed the soldiers to say that Jesus' disciples came at night and stole his body while they were sleeping. This fabricated story aimed to counter the growing belief in Jesus' resurrection and prevent the disciples from spreading the message that Jesus had risen from the dead. As years passed, Caiaphas continued prosecuting Jesus' believers in the same way he had done with Jesus. But there was a limit to his perversion. Eventually, he was deposed from the high priesthood. The reasons for his removal are not entirely clear from historical records, but it is noted that he was ousted from his position by the Roman legate Lucius Vitellius the Elder. In Dante Alighieri's literary work Inferno, Caiaphas is depicted in a special part of hell reserved for hypocrites, where he must stay forever, being walked on by others like a path. The apostolic constitutions, compiled in the late 4th century and believed to originate from Syria, stand as a significant collection of early Christian writings. Concerning Caiaphas, the high priest during Jesus' trial, the apostolic constitutions hint at a tragic end, suggesting suicide. While details are sparse, the implication resonates with certain Christian traditions portraying Caiaphas as grappling with guilt or facing divine retribution for his role in Jesus' crucifixion and the persecution of early Christians. In addition to this, the letter of Tiberius to Pilate, a medieval Christian text from the 11th century, tells about Caiaphas's fate. The letter tells that Tiberius Caesar, the Roman emperor, ordered the arrest of Pilate, Caiaphas, and other Jewish leaders, compelling them to face judgment in Rome. During their journey, Caiaphas unexpectedly dies in Crete under supernatural circumstances, the earth allegedly rejecting his body, necessitating its cover with stones. Who do you think is to be held responsible for Jesus Christ's crucifixion? Caiaphas or the Roman governor who endorsed and ordered the crucifixion? Do you believe that Jesus was to sacrifice for humanity, no matter who became the reason? In the comment section right below, share your thoughts on what if Jesus was not crucified and allowed to live. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on stories that might sound controversial, mysterious, and shocking, but are real and have roots in religious and history books. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.